Good morning, Bitcoin. It's Saturday. Oh, there it is. Now we're live. Good morning, Bitcoin. It's Saturday, October 7th, 2017, and we're live at the Paralinzi Polis Hackers Congress, the conference in Prague, the same place we were yesterday. We've got the amazing World Crypto Network background provided by CryptoHWWallet.com, who sponsored us and helped us be here. I'm here with Tone Vays and Eric Lombrozo. How's it going, guys?
Oh, it's good. It's good. I was speaking yesterday, and today I get to be here with you guys doing some interviews with some good questions. And I couldn't think of a better guy to start it off with. Go ahead and briefly introduce yourself, Eric, even though our audience should be very well familiar with you and your work.
Well, it's great to be here. I'm glad you guys could have me on. I wasn't originally going to be here, but I was in Europe, so I decided to swing by, and it's really great that we were able to do this. I guess my name is Eric Lombrozo. I've been working on Bitcoin since 2011, and I've been contributing to Bitcoin Core and working on this whole scaling debate and all the stuff that's been going on around it, trying to find better ways to better upgrade mechanisms for the protocol. And I have my company Cyphex, and we work on an application development stack for building applications for crypto. And it's really great to be here. So.
And you actually worked on Segwit.
Originally, I remember when Peter Willey was working on it originally for the Elements Alpha sidechain, and then we realized that we were able to do this as a soft fork, and so I actually met with him in person. We discussed this, and it was a really interesting thing that finally we were able to have upgrade mechanisms that could be fully backwards compatible and support all these new features into Bitcoin. So I really got really excited about that, because I felt that with the sidechain approach, it was going to be really hard to actually build the entire infrastructure around that necessary to be able to deploy it, and this was actually a way that was actually very practical for deploying this. So I got involved with that, and a lot of people worked on it, so it was a huge team effort, and I'm really happy that now people are actually building stuff on top of it. So it's really exciting times.
It was very cool, and I remember at your presentation at the Breaking Bitcoin conference in Paris, you actually showed the chat log. I think it was maybe Luke Jash Jr. who suggested, maybe just out of thin air, that you could do it as a soft fork.
Yeah, that was really funny, because to him it was apparently completely obvious, right?
Yeah, that's what I heard too. It was going to be a hard fork, and Luke is like, why? It's so easy, it's so simple. Here's the soft fork version.
Right. So basically, I think for a long time nobody really considered this mechanism, and it's kind of interesting how it just slipped everyone's mind. And here's Luke Jr. just, hey, we could just, and we were talking about something completely different. It had nothing to do with, I was actually trying to find a more generalized upgrade mechanism for soft forks, and he used Segwit as an example of one that would break my particular mechanism, and it did break it. But we found out something else that was pretty interesting. So. That's the way it works in this space. A lot of times you're working on some idea, and you kind of reach dead ends, but you kind of discover other things that you can do that actually are even greater than the thing you were trying to work on. So,
and I forget what he said exactly, but it was something like, having solved the world's greatest problems, Luke Dash Jr. goes to bed. Some kind of great finish. He just left with a flourish. It was typical chat room stuff.
This is why I know myself and most people on the World Crypto Network are such huge fans of Bitcoin Core, because we know it's a group of developers that are the top class in their field, and they don't always get along, but they do listen to other people's ideas.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting because I worked on a lot of commercial software before, and Bitcoin was kind of my first deep dive into free open source software development, and just kind of understanding the whole culture and the way that there's this whole process for how these things kind of get discussed and worked on, and I think that it's just really fascinating to be able to work with all just such a diverse group of people from all over the world that are doing all these coming up with all these interesting ideas. And a lot of stuff just there's a lot of chat that goes on, that a lot of hypothetical things. Some of them, most of the stuff that is just stays hypothetical, but the stuff that actually works is pretty amazing when we find something that actually does work. So
absolutely. And we had a little question in chat already. They said, is Bitcoin Core a bunch of guys working in the same room, or is it a decentralized team from all over the world?
It's the latter. It's a decentralized team from all over the world. Most people work online. There are sometimes events where people meet in person, such as this, but there aren't actually too many other.
Right. Well, I would personally be nervous if too many of them were in the same room.
Right.
That's a monster attack vector, and I remember we were discussing it. I think the first scaling conference in
Montreal.
Montreal, that's right. I think that conference still had the most core developers in one room. And I remember like a few of us were discussing, what if there is like some disastrous event? This is like the worst thing that can possibly happen for Bitcoin. So yeah, I'm glad they're not in the same room.
Yeah. So it's really all over the world. Everyone manages their own branch of the repository. So basically, and there's a lot of people that are working on their own projects too. It's not just like one single monolithic thing that everyone works on. But I think it's kind of like where a lot of most of the protocol expertise is kind of converged around this project because it's it started as the reference implementation of Bitcoin. I would like to see more of a formal specification for the protocol and a way to do more like formal verification that the code actually does what it's supposed to do. But these are things that are still far in the future as far as actually being able to do this practically. And this has caused a lot of issues as far as it's just really hard to make sure that the code actually functions as it's supposed to, and it's really, really sensitive to any kind of incompatibilities. So that's kind of why I think it's there aren't more widespread implementations that we see. I would like there to be a lot more. I actually worked on my own implementation before working on Bitcoin Core. But I quickly realized that Bitcoin Core just has much more battle testing. It's just been out there much more with people trying to bang on it. And it's like, well, I mean, if that's the most, if that's what everyone's been trying to attack and it's been successful in thwarting attacks, I started just using that as part of my stack. And I think a lot of people do that as well. But as far as the application layer itself, I believe that I've been trying to really work on ways that you can build applications on top of the Bitcoin network in an easier way without having to delve into the internals of the protocol, do too much of the low-level stuff. But right now, I think it's still the technology is still evolving, and so we're not yet at a point where it's really a concrete kind of application development model where people can really easily build on top of it.
Right, so speaking of building on top of it, what are you working on now that SegWit is in, and what's the latest you're hearing from the next layer scaling like Lightning and maybe some of the other Mimblewimble, or what else is out next?
Yeah, it's really exciting to see all that's happening with the Lightning Network and with more the fungibility stuff, Mimblewimble. I think we're going to start, hopefully seeing a lot more development in ways that we can do more sophisticated off-chain smart contracts and all these interesting protocol developments that are happening that don't require changes to the consensus layer, or that are able to experiment with other blockchains without having to actually muck around with Bitcoin. Because I think, this is just me, but I think that a lot of people probably would agree that the main value proposition for me for Bitcoin is a secure store of value that's censorship resistant. Mm-hmm. And the more that we're tinkering with the consensus layer, the more issues that arise with that. And we inject politics into the whole thing. And I would like to try to avoid that as much as possible. I think it's inevitable at some point. But it's really, really exciting to see more of this second layer stuff happening. And I'm just really, I'm looking forward to getting more back into that now that this segment's activated.
Now, before we go on into the politics and the drama, I wanted to go back to a question we were talking about with Joseph earlier, where he said, is there a single key to Bitcoin where someone makes the changes? And I think you had a really great answer to that people at home would like to hear. So is there a single key?
Yeah, no, so I mean, anyone can fork the repository, anyone can work on their own versions of it. It's really up to users to download it and run it. And use that to validate their own transactions. That's really what gives the network its strength, and then hash power obviously secures the chain, but it's the users, and hash power is actually creating the chain, but then users actually validate the chain, right? There's no central button where you just push that and everything changes, and if there was that, it'd be a huge attack vector, right? So a lot of people don't want that, and I think that it's a feature of Bitcoin that you can't really easily change the consensus layer. The default is no change. If you want to change it, then there is this process, but it's a process that can be kind of lengthy, and I think that some people might get frustrated because they want to see things happen faster. And I understand. I mean, I also worked in more of like a corporate software development environment, and where there are deadlines and there's project managers and like you have this kind of more more structured kind of way of developing. And I understand if you have users, obviously, if you have customers, that you need to serve, there are things that you need to take into account here. But when we're dealing with Bitcoin, we're thinking, well, what's actually the user that we're really trying to target here? What's the actual customer of Bitcoin? What's their reason for using it? And while I would love to see cheap payments for international payments or whatever that are really low fees and all that stuff, I think the technology to be able to make that happen and to add fungibility and all these other things, it's still going to take a little bit of time. There's one thing that Bitcoin does really, really, really well right now, and that's a secure store of value that's censorship resistant. And if we break that, then all the other stuff that we can build on top of it, basically, it can be built on top of other stuff that's probably much easier to do it with. I think that we don't really gain much from using Bitcoin for these other use cases if we don't care about this base layer kind of secure settlement layer. So I know that a lot of people are impatient about wanting to build more stuff on it right now, and they want mass adoption.
And ironically, the people that are most impatient are the ones that keep forking and getting in the way for you to get shit done.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of irony here. I think there's a lot of it's extremely ironic. I think people, and I understand, I mean, I think that some of this more corporate mindset, and I mean, I have a corporation too, but I've been trying to work well with the open source community, and it really is a different culture. You need to be able to kind of code switch between those two mindsets. Really, the more that you try to put pressure on an open source project, especially with something like Bitcoin, where there really is no room for disagreement at the consensus layer, the more you try to push for this kind of stuff, the more you introduce the possibility for there to be splits in opinions and divergences. In a typical corporation, well, there's someone that is kind of like going to have the last word. It's like, okay, well, this guy says this and this guy says that. Well, we're going to go with this. But that doesn't work on Bitcoin. You don't really have that kind of a situation because users can run whatever software they want. And there really needs to be a widespread agreement that something is an improvement that really helps everyone for their own use cases before they're willing to do that. And so now a lot of the friction that we're seeing stems from that. And if Bitcoin Core is a project or any other implementation of Bitcoin were to push for features that don't have widespread user support, a lot of the most loyal users would leave. They would not use it anymore. It's not like it's it's not really about a specific brand. I mean, there is a brand obviously associated with it, but the brand earned its reputation through many years of just having this almost impeccable track record of being super secure, of being super solid, having releases that work really well, that don't break anything, that everything keeps on working normally. So that's really what I think we're trying to accomplish.
All right, well, let's get to the two baby elephants in the room. I do have one more thing to ask you, but we'll do it after. So you want to kick us off with, with what everybody wants to hear?
It goes along well with what Eric was saying. A lot of these corporations have grown really big. You're a CEO, you have hundreds of employees, maybe even millions of dollars that you've raised or millions of dollars that you're about to spend. And you want to deliver on some of these ideas like micropayments or having a lot of transactions. And they're in too much of a hurry, and now they've started their own project. So the first one was the Bcash fork, which Roger Ver famously has supported, recently said had more users than Bitcoin. He was talking about the future, I guess, but the slides seem pretty present. And then I think Jihan at Bitmain has just stopped taking Bitcoin entirely, only taking Bitcoin Cash. So what do you think about the Bitcoin Cash project?
They're no longer selling out their miners because of it. So how has your view changed of Bcash before and now a month or two after?
Well, I mean, I think there's no way to stop people from creating forks or doing these kinds of things. It's just part of the way that Bitcoin works, that anyone can do this. And the system needs to be resilient enough to be able to handle these situations. I think it's handled the situation pretty well, despite all this. I think the way that Bcash split off actually is a more graceful way that it could happen. There could be more serious attacks where people try to claim the brand and try to do things like I think that in the case of the 2x, for instance, the fact that it doesn't have replay protection or strong replay protection. things like that. That there are people can do that. I mean, there's no that just demonstrates that nobody's in control. None of us are in control of this. We can't stop people from doing these things. So if someone is able to come up with an idea that is a really strong value proposition, and they're able to get a market for it, and they're able to build an industry around it, that's great. Even if it's not Bitcoin, or even if it's a fork of Bitcoin that does whatever. The only thing I think that is kind of concerning is when people do this in a way that that introduces unnecessary risk for people that are current Bitcoin holders or Bitcoin users. And I think that when you're introducing unnecessary risk, then that I do have a little bit of a problem with.
And just to refresh our audience, replay protection is the basic idea. If I sent some Bcash to someone, they could replay my transaction on the Bitcoin network and steal my Bitcoin. But fortunately, Bcash did provide replay protection. B2X has so far said that they're not going to.
Right.
But it can be avoided if you completely split all of your coins between the two chains.
Again, the users might not know that, and then they lose all their money.
Yeah,
right.
It happens really fast.
It requires either special tools or special usage of tools.
Considering Coinbase still can't figure out how to split coins.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just like it's so hard to keep this network operational without introducing new problems whenever you deploy any new software. I mean, the old software works, but whenever you introduce any new change to the software, there's always some risk associated with that. The idea that a multi-billion-dollar network would rely on an almost non-existent team with just a particular like political change just to satisfy a few people, to me is absurd. But I mean, as I said before, if there is truly a value proposition in that, I say let them compete. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's really the agenda here. So that's my main concern that I've had with this. I think that there's much more of a power struggle going on and a power grab.
And I think that brings us well into the next topic, which would be Bitcoin 2x or SegWit 2x. It started out with Bcash, which raised their block size to 2 megabytes. Now the next one, 2x, is going to double the block size
to 8 megabytes.
To 8 megabytes? I'm not sure.
They set the max block size limit to 8 megabytes and then took out SegWits.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the new one will have SegWit, but will also have larger blocks.
We'll have it'll double the transaction weight, the block weight, the maximum block weight. But I mean, I think that the idea initially was that it was kind of a way to get SegWit expedited and activated. And I think something that really a lot of the people that were that signed the New York agreement were actually very much in favor of SegWit activating and seeing that as the next step, and then working together to build something after that. And I was fully in favor of that. I'm like, okay, well, if we're going to do a hard fork, let's bring more people together and let's actually work on something.
Sure.
But then at the end, it kind of became this kind of horse trading thing where it's like, well, if I give you this, you give me that, right? And really, the only people that were really, really strongly opposed to activating SegWit were a small number of miners. And so this whole thing was really a thing to appease those miners, to kind of get SegWit activated and then start working on the next thing.
It was a small number of miners, but those miners controlled a significant hash rate.
Yeah.
So it was complicated.
It was complicated, definitely, and I think that the way that SegWit was released initially, using BIP9, complicated that further because it created this whole narrative that miners vote on protocol upgrades. And that's never actually how it worked. Actually, the first few protocol changes didn't use any kind of miner signaling at all. That was introduced later to be able to smooth out these changes, because the more hash power you have, the more you can kind of ensure that you have a smooth transition. But I think these miners saw that there was a conflict of interest, obviously, and the conflict of interest wasn't a matter of compromise. I think there was there were diametrically opposed visions as far as how this should be, how the protocol should develop, just because of their own interests of what they were doing, right? And so that's the problem. It's like when people get together and they try to sign an agreement and it doesn't really satisfy what anyone really wants in the end, it's not going to work. And now I think a lot of people's reputations are tied to this thing, and it's really hard for them to back out of this thing. And if they try to declare this a victory because SegWit already activated, well then I think some of the people that were trying to push for this actually, it's well known, it's not a secret that some people were looking at replacing the protocol development team, and that was one of the big motivations here. So a lot of people don't take very kindly to that, and for understandable reasons. I would prefer none of this nonsense to happen, and I mean, I guess that we need a little bit of drama because that keeps things more fun. But
so like you said, BIP9 started out as a miner signaling, just so that we could all signal we're ready for an upgrade, but then it started to become miner voting. It became a very political thing. Then the SegWit 2x and the New York agreement happened essentially under the gun of the user-activated soft fork. The user-activated soft fork said, at this certain day, we switch to SegWit or you're not on our network. The corporations acted, signed the NYA plus 2x agreement, and then they kind of ducked under the user-activated soft fork by activating SegWit. It came on the network. It seemed like things were fine. The spam attacks stopped, the mempool was empty. The block size was slightly increased because of the way they store the witness outside of the transaction versus inside the transaction. So there was a small block size increase, but then at the same time, these drums started again, that they needed this 2x hard fork. And maybe it is like you say, it was some kind of thing they had to throw in to make the deal work, and you had to save face, you need to get something out of the agreement. But now it's looking like there's a full potential hard fork, which would fork Bitcoin into a third coin and maximum confusion.
Yeah, I mean, I think someone, I don't know who it was that said that one fork dilutes the brand, but 10 forks would actually strengthen it.
I'm starting to have that view as well.
We're getting into Stalin territory here.
I'm starting to get that view as well. I mean, I was very against the 2x hard fork, but that's because I thought that Bcash was not going to amount to anything, and Bcash is still a minor pain in the ass right now because it messes with the Bitcoin hash rate. It steals it for a short amount of time so they can insta-mine Bcash. That slows down Bitcoin finding blocks. Then their difficulty goes up. All the miners come back to Bitcoin. So it kind of goes back and forth. So now I personally am looking forward to the 2x fork so that they can flip their hash rate between each other and leave us Bitcoiners alone. What do you think about that?
You're the only one there, I think. Yeah.
They're going to be flipping between all three, just because it's the same. It's SHA-256 on all of them. Miners just tend to follow whatever's most profitable. I mean, there are some miners that might have some ideological or like longer-term strategic interests here.
I'm thinking
they've got to pay the power bill. Yeah.
Completely, their cycles would be completely opposite each other, so that they would be insta-mining their coins, like a few days this, few days that, and they're not actually going to get a chance to go to Bitcoin. They'll just be flipping their insta-mined coins.
Well, I mean, Bcash has the emergency difficulty adjustment, right? And that's part of the reason that this has happened and has had this cycle. Right now, 2x, as far as I understand, does not have anything planned.
Oh,
like
they
that.
will.
But they probably, I mean, yeah.
Well, how do you know what they have planned? We hear they're not posting any code to GitHub. They're not telling anyone what they're doing. So how is anyone even supposed to have an idea of what the hell they're even coding back there?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that trying to think that you can upgrade the entire network infrastructure without actually publishing code, like a month out before it.
It's terrifying.
Here's another question. Can you name any developers in either of these hard forks you consider to be competent developers?
That's a meat question.
We'll skip that one. Hey, will Bit9 ever be used again?
I don't know if it will. Some core developers still believe that it could be used in the future. I think that given the circumstances of SegWit, it made it clear that, abundantly clear, that if it's a politicized fork, or if it's a politicized change in any way, it's really dangerous because of the way that miners use the hash rate it could be used to manipulate the price and other things like that. I consider that an attack. I think a lot of other people also consider that an attack on the network itself, if miners are able to manipulate the price by changing hash rate and stuff like that. So.
Now going back to the EDA, you mentioned that it adjusts the difficulty on the block. So at some point we've seen up to 45 Bcash blocked mined in a single hour. Their inflation rate is through the roof. And there's even a possibility and actually an eventuality that their halvening will come sooner than the Bitcoin halvening. Is this a good thing for Bcash, or do you prefer the Bitcoin style of one block every 10 minutes, that kind of thing?
I don't think anyone thinks it's a really good thing except the miners that are making profits from this, right? For them, sure. I mean, it's a great thing that they can, just dump all this coin all of a sudden, and they can. Some miners have made a lot of money from this, but
I gotta go get that.
For everyone else. Right,
they're also, okay, Tone's got to leave, but he'll be right back. He's going to go bring some more guests to us. But it's also interesting with the emergency difficulty adjustment and all that's happening that Coinbase's coins are still locked. So you have, I don't know how many coins are in Coinbase, but all those people can't sell. All these miners are over mining the coin. And then I'm not sure about Zappo. I think Zappo is going to force their users to sell right before Coinbase releases their coins. Probably a smart move by Zappo. But what do you think about the idea that so many of these coins are locked, as well as maybe old hodlers who have tons of Bitcoin don't even bother with this? Their coin's also locked, and the miners are just pounding out these coins.
Right, sure. I mean, for sure, the price discovery has been, not particularly efficient, just because of the fact that a lot of people have Bcash and they don't even know that they have it, or they don't know how to use it safely, right?
Or it's locked in a wallet that hasn't added support yet. All kinds of things.
Exactly. So I think that it's definitely, and obviously, some people have been buying it and hoarding it and trying to prop up the price that way, right? I think that the same thing would happen with any fork if there's sufficient interest in actually keeping it afloat, but that's not a way that you can sustain an economy for very long, right? So at some point, I think, unless you have real users that are actually using it and real hodlers that actually value it, there's no way that you can prevent this indefinitely from happening. But yeah, I mean, a lot of hodlers that don't hold a large amount might think, well, it's not really worth my time to try to sell this. But if all of them did it, obviously it would have a huge economic effect, right? So it's mostly been, either large hodlers or a few, large services or wallets that have a lot of or have either a lot of users or a few users that have a lot of coins, right, that are dumping, and that's kind of brought the price down. So I think the same dynamic would happen with any fork. I think just the time it takes for people to understand maybe after a while it'll become more of a common thing that people can just say, okay, well, whenever there's an airdrop, I've got these tools already set up so I can just dump it, right? And I know some people that actually have set this up for their particular setup just because it's worth it for them to do that, right? But yeah, eventually I think the more that this happens, the more likely that people will eventually start doing that more.
There's also what Jimmy Song talked about, how there's a socialized cost to coins like this, where the exchanges all had to scramble last minute to get ready for this. Just like with the Ethereum Classic split, Vitalik went around to the exchanges, told them no one would mine the old chain. People started mining the old chain. Somebody listed it on an exchange. Everybody had to list it. But the same thing for Bcash. They all had to do all this extra work at last minute to try to make their customers happy. And I know Zappo and Local Bitcoins has both said, this is the last one. Going forward, we're not going to support any more hard fork coins. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to stand on that. There might even be a legal problem if they're like keeping their people away from money. But what do you think about the socialized costs of these forks?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's obviously a great cost to a lot of these service providers and people that make wallets and these exchanges obviously have to deal with a lot of things to be able to support it. It's possible that it could improve or increase their volume. So there are there is kind of like a silver lining to it for them maybe, but obviously it does add a lot of cost to supporting these kinds of things. And but the greatest externalized cost is to the users who must deal with all these additional hurdles to make sure that they're using their stuff safely and that the services that they use actually accept the coin that they think that they accept and all these other things. I think that right now, given the fact that we've seen this huge bull market happening and a lot more publicity and so much more, people being aware, like there's a lot of more high-profile people that are talking about Bitcoin. Doing these kinds of attacks on the brand right now seems like the timing could probably be a little bit better as far as doing these things. But maybe it just needs to go through this. Maybe I kind of think that. We need to see it. We need to battle test Bitcoin. We need to see if it can withstand all these different kinds of attacks. And if it can't, then maybe it's not worth defending. But I think that it has so far shown very extremely resilient to all these kinds of things. And I'm hoping that the more that this happens, the stronger it'll get.
And I think that segues well into what I'd like to talk about next, which is the user confusion. Because I know a lot of people, they log into Coinbase. It used to be really great. They just sold Bitcoin. It was really easy. But now they're like, oh, Bitcoin is too expensive, so I bought Litecoin. Or I don't know what Ethereum is, but I bought some of that too. And it's going to get worse and worse with this Bcash and then this B2X, especially with Bcash using the Bitcoin logo, slanting it to the left, painting it green. I often say that Bitcoin doesn't have a corporation. There's no boss. There's no one to promote it or do videos. We have to do this all on our own. The core team works on their own. But this also means there's no one to sue when they steal our logo, when they steal our name. So what about this user confusion? And specifically, I have a technical question. I usually prefer to ask questions I know the answer to, but I don't think I know the answer to. If I send Bitcoin to a Bcash address, or if I send Bcash to a Bitcoin address, is it possible for me to untangle that and get it back?
If you have the keys, then sure. But I mean, if you sent it to someone who requested a payment on one particular blockchain and you sent it to another one, it's on them to be able to recover that. So maybe they don't have the ability to do that. I mean, you need maybe some special tools, or I mean, assuming that they do have the keys themselves, in principle they should be able to. But it does add a lot more hassle on the receiver's end.
And this is again with the socialized costs of these new coins. Your exchange now has to write unraveling code. You have to have some kind of tech support system that gets you through. I really did send it, or I really did mess it up. It's a whole complexity added to the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the great features about Bitcoin is the fact that it, you know, that you can't reverse transactions. Once you send it, it's kind of like fire and forget. It's kind of like it's done, right?
Yeah.
Once you start dealing with these kinds of situations, it's like, well, I sent it here, but I actually want a refund to this other address, and so now you basically destroyed that whole part of the usability that a lot of people really like about Bitcoin. So yeah, for sure. I mean, it adds a lot more complexity to the system. I think it doesn't really make sense in the long-term view of these corporations' interests. I think that maybe short-term there could be more trading volume and people who are doing that kind of stuff. Obviously, like, more volatility means more opportunities for profits. It also means more opportunities for losses, right? But I don't think that it really reflects this kind of long-term thinking of, you know, what Bitcoin really is going to, what market Bitcoin really is going to serve. Right now, it seems more kind of like an attempt to demonstrate that they're able to say, well, this is how we want it to be, and this is how it's going to be. More than actually serving the users and their interests, right? So that is a little concerning. But I mean, I believe in free markets. I believe that the smart money will find smart people. In the end, I think a lot of this stuff will probably get weeded out, and companies that are not able to deal with the changing times and actually provide people with things that they want are not going to be able to succeed. So.
Well, and additionally, if you had a whole ton of coins, you could sell them to get the B cash. You could sell them to get the B2X. You're making tons of money. 10% on $100 million is like $1 million. I mean, that's a great deal. Not for myself personally, but if we move on, I think, to the core of the new political problems that we're having. I've seen Jeff Garzik a lot on my Twitter feed. He's been fighting back and forth with people. A lot of people have changed their name to No2X, so you know what side they're on. But recently, Jeff seemed to have really gone for the jugular, and Roger Ver as well, saying that Bitcoin.com would be labeling SegWit2x, the 2x thing, as Bitcoin, using the ticker symbol BTC. So what do you think about this latest branch in the confusion of SegWit2x?
Well, I mean, they're a media company. They, just publish articles and stuff. I mean, they can basically say whatever they want. There's tabloid journalists that write whatever, BS, and there's no laws against that per se. But it's very different for companies that actually are dealing with Bitcoin balances and people that trust them to hold those balances for them. I don't think that they have the luxury of being able to just be so flippant about these kinds of things. So I think that maybe Bitcoin.com is trying to use their brand to kind of give more credibility to this, and hopefully that will coerce more, bring more pressure to bear on other companies to do that. But I think that in the end, users are going to be left in a situation where they stand to lose a lot if they use these companies. And I don't think it's in these companies' interests. I think that it's really setting themselves up for massive liabilities if they don't actually take precautions against these kinds of things. Like, for instance, what Bitfinex is doing, I mean, they deal a lot with these margin trading accounts and stuff like that, where it's just not possible to just be so nonchalant about, oh, we're just going to change the ticker symbol. I mean, there's a lot of capital here that's basically people have committed to particular things that they probably don't want changing on them just like that, just because of someone's whim, right? So I don't think that people that are really serious investors or more sophisticated people are going to fall for this stuff. Some less sophisticated people or some newer users might fall for these kinds of things. I think that there's just a lot of scammery that takes place in this space. So I think that given the standards that exist in the space already, this kind of thing is not compared to other stuff that goes on. I mean, I don't know, but I think that in the end, I don't think that really sophisticated people are going to be fooled by this kind of a thing.
And there was a really great letter that Matt Corello, Blue Matt, on Twitter wrote to the SEC about one of the ETFs. He said that the ETF potentially could recognize B2X as the real Bitcoin, sell all of their Bitcoin, buy a ton of B2X, and the users who just hold these ETF tickets wouldn't be able to have any say in it, and one day they had great Bitcoin and the next day they had this 2X questionable thing. Is that a possibility as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole idea of defining the blockchain that just has the longest blockchain, the blockchain with most work, without also considering the consensus rules that apply to that blockchain, doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, at face value, the whole thing just falls flat. But I think that it's kind of, people have been using a lot this thing from the white paper, which was a little ambiguous, this whole one CPU, one vote thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that people that haven't really worked on the protocol itself, or that haven't really developed too much, worked on actually working on consensus rule things for crypto networks, maybe it's not so clear, because I think for a lot of us that have worked on this kind of stuff, it kind of becomes obvious after a certain point. But it wasn't so obvious when I first started working on this stuff. I thought, oh yeah, I could change Bitcoin. I can just easily do all this stuff and just get people to adopt it. And
the first time I saw it, I thought this will be great. I'm going to copy that money. Then I have twice as much money. Then I'll copy it again. This is fantastic. I copy everything on the computer. So
exactly, and you try to do that, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe it doesn't work like that. And so then when you actually start working on this, you realize that there are certain constraints that you just have to live by, and anyone that doesn't want to address those, they're just going to have to face the consequences of that. And I mean, I don't think that there's anyone to blame for that. It's like people are trying to pin blame on someone. It's like, oh, it's these people's fault because we can't do this thing. No, it's just the way the system works, and you just have to live within the constraints of the system.
So now I think we're heading towards the end of the interview here, but I want to ask you about what you think is going to happen going forward, because I've heard of several absolutely terrifying attack vectors that the SegWit2x crowd could use. One of them is a monetary attack where they could sell a great amount of real Bitcoin and buy a great amount of SegWit2x Bitcoin, driving down the price of Bitcoin, driving up the price of 2x. The other is more of a difficulty attack, where if, say, 90% of the miners left Bitcoin, went to 2x, then Bitcoin blocks, which take 10 minutes, would take incredibly long time. Then when the difficulty finally adjusts, maybe those miners come back again, mine a couple of blocks, then they leave again, leaving Bitcoin really crippled and forced to change to a new proof of work. Do you think that'll happen? Do you think it'll blow over? What's your feeling going forward?
I mean, anything can happen. I don't think that that's the most likely scenario, but I'm not going to try to predict exactly what's going to happen.
Sure.
I think that it's just in the miners' interest to continue to mine blocks that are in high demand that people want to pay for, and I think that the large hodlers are the ones that most. It is the main network effect here. People that hold a lot of coins that are willing to put their money where their mouth is, and in the end, I think that that's what drives the whole thing. Are people going to be willing to put their money where their mouth is with B2X? I don't know. It doesn't seem like reasonable people are actually trying to use B2X because they or people that are pushing for it actually believe that that's the future of Bitcoin. It's more just like a short-term ploy to gain some advantage in some other thing, and it's just part of this whole game. Are they willing to actually risk long-term losses? For putting their money where their mouth is? I don't know. I mean, if they do and they lose, then I mean, I think maybe something else. I think that the more informed people are going to be the ones that ultimately determine what happens.
And there is, of course, the famous Bitcoin B2X bet going on Twitter right now. Charlie Lee from Litecoin had offered 250 Bitcoins. A couple of others joined him, and I think Roger's up to 1,000 Bitcoins. Adam Back was asking for 25,000. And this would all be to trade their B2X coins for the SegWit or for the real Bitcoins. So they are trying to put their money where their mouths are, but we don't know if they're going to go with monetary difficulty attacks. They've already chosen confusion with the Bitcoin.com potential relabeling, which we hope they'll change their mind. We hope they'll back out of, because it is a potential liability that they could be sued if someone bought the wrong coin based on their advice and was just confused. But thank you so much, Eric, for being on the show. And I think we have a little gift here from our sponsor, Joseph, if you want to come in. Joseph's from Crypto HW Wallet. You can check that out at cryptohwwallet.com. And we've got a gift here for Eric. Oh, you can do this one, or you can bring in one. But we have a little leather holder for your Trezor wallet. If you want to check that out. Joseph, if you want to say.
Yeah. Nice meeting you, Eric. great to be here to give you this gift, this honor.
Well, thank you
This
so
is
much.
for a Trezor because of the Trezor event, so we have a Trezor leather case. Hopefully you enjoy it, like it.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right,
Yeah,
and
thanks for having me.
yeah, thanks so much, Eric, for being on the show, and we'll hang out later at the conference. But
Sure.
we want to let you go out and enjoy it. I think we're going to welcome back in Tone
Hey,
Vays.
thanks for coming in. Thanks,
Yes,
for
this
coming
next
in,
time.
Eric. And we're gonna keep that, and there you go.